Hello, everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, waiting for more attendees. Uh, Thanks for coming.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We are excited to be here today to give an informational webinar on the 2024 Innovations Grant Program. So hopefully we're going to give a brief presentation and then open it up for questions and answers. So hopefully this covers some of the questions you might have about the Innovation Grants Program and your submission. So great. So just before we dive into the innovations grants itself, I'm just going to give a brief overview of climate change AI and some of the other work that we're doing as part of the organization. So CCAI is a global nonprofit that works to catalyze impactful work at the intersection of climate change and machine learning through building community of diverse stakeholders, guiding impactful work through educational resources and programs, filling gaps in essential infrastructure, such as funding, tools, data sets, and advancing discourse and advising relevant players in the climate change and AI space. So just a little bit about some of the other programs that we have going at CCAI. There are a lot of digital resources on our website, which you can visit at climatechange.ai. So reports with opportunities for researchers, practitioners, policymakers. We also run a lot of conferences and events. For example, we have a workshop series and an upcoming workshop at the 2024 NeurIPS conference. And you can view all of the past papers that were part of some of the workshops that have been run by CCI on our website. We also run a summer school, both a virtual summer school and an in-person summer school, which I encourage you to to check out. There's a whole bunch of awesome resources and lectures and tutorials as part of that program. Of course, we also have funding programs. I'm going to talk more about this. We're going to talk more about this over the next hour, as well as a newsletter, a blog, and community platform, which we encourage you to sign up for because there's a lot of cool resources and opportunities that kind of are posted on these platforms. Okay, just a disclaimer for this webinar. Of course, we're going to be as accurate as possible over the next hour, but some of the information that we're going to present is subject to change. So for the most accurate and up-to-date information, definitely visit our Innovation Grants website, and anything that's on the website is kind of the most accurate version of any sort of eligibility requirements or evaluation criteria or timeline for the grants program. Okay, we are also going to do a Q&A after we run through a few slides. So we encourage you to submit any questions that you have in the chat, but we also encourage you to be as general as possible with those questions so that the questions we answer are hopefully relevant to other participants. We do want to, another disclaimer is that there are maybe some questions that we won't be able to answer due to fairness reasons. So if we don't answer your question or your question wasn't addressed, feel free to email us at grants@climatechange.ai. Just some brief highlights from previous grant cycles. So over the past 2 years of grant cycles, we've awarded we've had $3 million of awarded and funded projects across 22 projects or 22 innovation grants. Those grants have been awarded to folks at 62 institutions across 22 countries and are really broad, or there's a lot of variability in the domain applications of the grant projects, everything from power and energy systems to forestry and other land uses to buildings and climate justice. There are a whole bunch of the example funded projects on our website. They're all highlighted from the 2023 and 2022 innovation grants program. So we encourage you to go check out those projects and kind of see what has been funded in the past. For example, in 2023, there was quite a range of projects, everything from optimizing power systems to using machine learning and satellite images to map the methane, to understand and evaluate the methane emissions from rice cultivation in Ghana. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to David to talk a little bit more about this year's Innovation Grants Program.
Hey everyone, thanks Millie. So to give some just basic numbers and information about the grants program, and we're going to go into more details on the different aspects of this over the coming slides. This is a grants program with up to 150K USD per proposal. You should note it does not have to be that full amount. You can submit a proposal for what you need in the project. For projects of 12 months in duration, and we will award it up to a total of 1.4 million in grants across all the different projects. The basic scope is projects at the intersection of AI and climate change, which can include some mixture of research, deployment, and development of the project. Eligibility. We'll go into more detail on this in a moment, but the principal investigator has to be affiliated with an accredited university in a new OECD member country. There are no asterisk eligibility restrictions on co-investigators. The eligibility restrictions there are legal restrictions, like countries that we are not allowed to award money to because of the US State Department. But we'll get into this a bit more in a coming slide. The proposal submission deadline is September 15th at the end of the day anywhere on Earth. The submission site is this CMT link. And this is the contact information. We are very grateful to sponsorship from the Quadrature Climate Foundation, Google DeepMind, and Global Methane Hub, and fiscal sponsorship from the Canada Hub of Future Earth International. So let's go into eligibility, a little bit more detail. So the principal investigator must be eligible to hold grants under their name at an accredited university in an OECD member country. So these are OECD member countries. There's also a list on the website. Note that this is a list of 38 specific countries. It is important that you check that your country is one of these. Again, this is also universities. There is sometimes ambiguity about what is a university. Feel free to contact us if you have questions about that. But in particular, industry research labs and national labs are not eligible to serve as lead institutions. However, there are no such restrictions on co-investigators, i.e. they can be outside the OECD or they can be non-academic partners. You can have private companies as partners on the project. And you can have countries outside of the OECD, and we encourage both of those things. It is really great to have a wide variety of partners, or to have a couple of different partners. It is fine to have funding be sent to these partner institutions, including to non-academic or private entities, and it's fine to send, there's no restriction on how much funding can be sent to a partner institution or to a co-investigator, or outside of OECD member countries. Again, there is an asterisk on this no restrictions, which is detailed a bit more on the website, but there are certain places that we cannot legally send grants to, unfortunately. So you can check that, but it is sufficient to say that the OECD member country restriction and the university restriction do not apply to co-investigators. No aspect of a project should be double funded by other funding bodies. You can have a related piece of a project be funded, but the same thing should not be funded by us and by other organizations. I look forward to hearing any questions about this. So there is a requirement of that we should talk through about data sets and IP. So first of all projects in any of the tracks of the grant proposal, the grant program, should include a new data set. Now, we'll get into more details in a moment on just what these different tracks are. There's a special track on data set gaps this year, and in this case, it should be the primary focus to develop a new data set. In the other tracks, it doesn't have to be the primary focus. The focus can be on parts of research into machine learning algorithms or existing machine learning algorithms that have their applicability in a certain context, or different parts of combining these with scaling up projects. There can be lots of different focuses of a project, except in the special track on dataset gaps where the focus should be primarily on the dataset. But in all cases, there should be a dataset released as part of the project. Oops, I apologize. Can you still see my screen? You can still see my screen? Okay. So in the with respect to the data set, it should be compliant with fair data principles. You can look those up: findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. That is there are a specific set of data principles you can look at. Creation of a data set may include various different things, pretty broad. Could include annotating data with labels, collecting completely new data, collating existing data from multiple sources, creating a data simulator that might be useful in reinforcement learning, for example, as long as it's well grounded in reality, or open sourcing existing data that was formerly private. That's pretty broad. And then here's the IP requirement. All grant IP, including the data set or simulator produced, and any trained models or detailed descriptions of architectures and training procedures, etc., all of this must be made publicly available under an open license. So that's something relevant to bear in mind. Remember, there can be partners that are private entities, but the IP developed as part of the grant has to be made open. Okay, so there are several different tracks. The main track for the grants program. This is similar to some last years, if you saw that. This is open to projects in any of the following areas. AI or machine learning linked to climate change mitigation, adaptation, or climate science. Some examples of this. This could be using machine learning in the context of climate change mitigation, for example, agriculture, buildings and cities, heavy industry and manufacturing, power and energy systems, waste, transportation, forestry, etc. Machine learning applied to climate change adaptation, for example, disaster prediction, management, and relief. Machine learning in earth science, ecosystems, and natural systems, insofar as it is relevant to climate change. Machine learning for research and development of technologies like electrofuels, carbon capture, and sequestration. And machine learning approaches in behavioral and social science related to climate change, for example, as related to climate finance and economics, climate justice, and climate policy. This is not a comprehensive list. These are just some examples to make it clear that the diversity of projects which are within scope. Now, we also accept projects in AI governance in the context of climate change and in assessment of greenhouse gas emissions impacts of AI or AI-driven applications. And note that in these two contexts, that dataset requirement may be lifted. That's basically because there may not be relevant data sets necessarily in these contexts. Of course, if there is a data set that's part of the grant IP, that would need to be released. Okay, we also have a special track on methane this year. This is projects using AI or machine learning to address problems in methane, related climate change mitigation in the shorter medium-term period, i.e. well before 2040. Example areas include, but are not limited to, energy, including coal mine methane, ventilation air methane, flaring, methane leak detection, super emitters, and methane emissions from oil and gas. Waste and circular economy. Oh, and I should note, again, this is climate change mitigation. If the goal is like methane development, that's not within scope. It's climate change mitigation. Waste and circular economy, including food loss and waste recovery, food or organic waste separation, dumps or landfill emissions, wastewater treatment, and sludge management. Agriculture, including livestock, manure management, biomass burning, and rice cultivation. These are, again, example areas. There are other areas that are within scope. Okay. Then we have a special track this year on dataset gaps. So submissions to this track should have as their primary focus the creation of a documented dataset or simulator by collating, labeling, and or annotating existing data. Again, same kind of definition of dataset before, and or by collecting, simulating, or otherwise making available new data that can enable further research. But again, the difference between this and the dataset requirement overall is that this should be the primary focus. Eligible project areas are the same as in the main track. Now, in this case, applicants should highlight the particular gap in dataset availability that this project aims to address and why this is important for climate change mitigation, adaptation, or climate science. And I want to highlight the proposals in this special track on dataset gaps may also request support from a Google DeepMind researcher in addition to the financial award, and there's an option in the CMT submission form to indicate that you want to take advantage of that, or you may want to take advantage of that option. It's not a commitment. Okay, a lot of information. Let's take a look at the timeline. The submission deadline is again September 15th. Notification of results will happen in December, and the award start date should be in February. Award end date would be a year later. And there's some Q&A on the website surrounding like the any flexibility of the start and end dates, but that should be the expected start and end date that you should plan on. Evaluation criteria. So this is a climate impact grants program. Climate relevance is key. Impact in climate change mitigation, adaptation, climate science as it relates to climate change. The AI and machine learning relevance is also important, but importantly, that is not about coming up with something new. Sometimes you will want to come up with something new, sometimes that's what's needed, but the importance there is that it is relevant. It is the appropriate method for the task at hand. Simple AI and machine learning is completely fine. If random forests are the best tool for a job. That is completely within scope. For example, you can also use fancy, recently developed AI and machine learning, but you should also justify why that's necessary. In the vast majority of cases, there is the requirement that there is a release of the data set. And in those cases, data set quality and impact is relevant as well. The project pathway to impact is crucial. So understanding not just how this is being developed from a research side, if there's research, but how that is actually tied very coherently and clearly to impact on the ground. Ethics is also a fundamental axis of evaluation. Feasibility of the project. I think that goes without saying, and the expertise of the team, which will depend upon exactly what project you're working on. So the following will be considered favorably. Deployment partners, that's very relevant to project pathway to impact. So including deployment partners on the team, or integrating very clearly who those deployment partners are, even if they're not on the team, is important. Traditionally underfunded areas of work are also considered favorably. Equity considerations are also relevant in many different ways in evaluation. Okay. There's a budget. There's several parts of the application. We're not going to go through all the parts, but there is a budget. I want to mention the budget. There's a budget that needs to be submitted in a single PDF. Includes an itemized budget, including the total amount requested, how it will be used if a grant is awarded, the brief budget justification of these amounts. There are eligible expenses, which I should note here. Again, this is not the full proposal. There's more details on the proposal on the website. Eligible expenses include a lot of different things. It could be equipment, it could be software, compute, it could be salaries for PIs and research staff, it could be expenses associated with project-related travel, like conferences or field work. This can include dependent care, I should note. And overhead, it's important to indicate overhead. There's a maximum rate of 10% of the total amount requested. That can be divided in any particular way across the PI institution and partners. Again, there's no restriction on how much goes to the partners. You could have a PI institution that takes 0 of the funding and distributes it all to the partners, or vice versa. Institutions often allow the 10% overhead rate when they are asked explicitly about this. So if your institution says on its website, we take this amount of overhead, go to them and check. And if there's something that you want to talk about with your institution, you feel it would be helpful. We talked about it with them. You can send a message to grants@climatechange.ai. So in general, this 10% is often not a sticking point in practice. Worth bearing that in mind. And again, allocation to subgrantees, funds will be contracted solely to the accredited university with which the PAI is affiliated. Any further dissemination of funds, which again it's not limited how much gets disseminated to partner institutions, but that has to be managed by the lead institution, and the lead institution has the right to decide how to allocate the funds between them and their subgrantees, but that obviously should be, dealt within the budget and the budget justification. Okay, I'm handing this back to Millie.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, David. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how to submit your proposals or your applications. So again, the deadline is September 15th. We've reiterated this multiple times, but just want to once more. Applications will be submitted on a CMT website, which you can find the grant for, or the link for just here and on our website. We also have a whole section on the website about application instructions. So if you have any questions on that, I encourage you to refer to that. But in the submission portal, you'll be asked for some basic information about the PI and the team. And just note that the first name in the CMT author list, so you'll create an author list in that online platform, will be treated as the PI. So make sure that the person who is listed first in that application is the person who is at an eligible institution and is intended to be the primary investigator of the project. On that submission portal, you'll also add your project description, which is a maximum of 12 pages. And in the same order and with the headings that we indicate on the website. So like there's a summary, a project outline, some information about deliverables, team, yeah, these sorts of things, and your budget and budget justification, as well as CVs for key personnel, which will be all just in one PDF file. Just briefly on the CMT submission portal. So when you click on that link, that's like the submission link, you'll come up to this page and it looks a bit empty. If you've never used CMT, which like the first time I did it, I was quite confused. Just make sure you click on that button that says create new submission, which you can see highlighted in red here. And when you click on that, the actual, can you change the slide? The actual submission form will pop up. And so that's where you'll actually kind of populate all of the information and you'll be prompted to kind of include your team members and your proposal and these sorts of things. Okay, and that's all we have for slides. So we'll start to take or answer some of the questions that have been posted in the chat, but we encourage you to continue to post questions while we kind of start to work through answering what we currently have.
Fantastic. And actually, no, we are recording this. So we're just reading your questions, but don't put something into a question that you don't want like read. Some questions. Is the program about climate and ML only or AI in general? For example, there are ideas based upon search-based algorithms. I find chemical compounds not really qualifying as machine learning, but part of AI. AI that is not machine learning is within scope. You can use symbolic AI approaches or other AI approaches. There is a Q&A. There's a question on the website that says, what is AI? And we follow, I think, the OECD definition of AI, which is extremely broad.
Great. I guess we can just trade off questions, David. I'll do the next
Yeah,
one.
sounds good.
So how many projects do we expect to fund this year? We don't have a set number of projects that we're expecting to fund. So we kind of have an overall pool of funding and we'll allocate that to projects, again, up to 150K per project. And so, yeah, there's some range of projects that might, entail.
Should the execution of the project start at the beginning of 2025 necessarily? So the expected start date for projects is February of 2025. And the so the let me come back to this question actually, but you should expect that the start date is February of 2025. I'm sorry.
I think that's also probably relevant to the next question of when.
Well, the grant money is dispersed in one go, so it depends upon when like the agreement is finalized, but it is around the start date of the project. It is not dispersed in increments. So I hope that answers the question there. Do you want to go for the next one? Sorry.
So next question, a researcher or a research-centered NGO comprised of scientists and policy practitioners that's not associated with a university cannot be the principal investigator of a project. So the PIs do need to be affiliated with an accredited degree granting nonprofit institution. That being said, as we've talked about a little bit, there's no limitation to the amount of the grant that can be allocated to co-investigators. So you will need a partner at an accredited degree granting institution.
There is a question, OECD member countries. So this is actually a request basically to find a PI from an OECD member country. I encourage anybody who's in that position to post on the climate change community platform. That's community.climatechange.ai. You can post there and try to find say, hey, I'm looking for this. It's a huge community. There will be people who are interested in partnering with you, hopefully. You can also reach out to individual institutions or PIs.
Great. Next question is it okay for most of the money to be paid out to co-investigators? Yes, that is totally fine and up to the project how the funding is allocated amongst co-investigators.
Question about whether the presentation is going to be made available. Yes, we're recording it. It's going to be available on YouTube soon.
I'll
That's
let
on
you.
the Climate Change AI channel on YouTube. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Should the execution of the grant start at the beginning of 2025
Oh,
necessarily? Oh, wait.
this was the question that we were coming back to. Sorry.
No worries.
Um,
Do you mind taking the dataset special track question?
Absolutely. So there's a question for the dataset special track. Does the proposal need to include AI or ML in the collection process? This is a great question. No, no, no. It does not have to do that. It is a dataset that is intended to catalyze work in AI and ML. There's no need to use AI or ML to collect the dataset itself. The dataset could be you went out in the field and measured trees, for example, like but many other things too. There's no need for any tech in there at all.
David, I'm going to also let you take the next question about
Yeah, absolutely.
researcher support.
So there is there a limit if in the special track on dataset gaps, there's the in-kind support which is offered with respect to a Google DeepMind researcher. Is there a limit on this support, like number of hours or salary equivalent? And does the 150K have to pay for the time, or is that support in addition? So, and then there's another part to the question I'll get to in a moment. So first, it is separate from the monetary award. You do not have to allocate money from your budget to pay for that that Google DeepMind researcher. We don't have guidance yet on how much time could be allocated. So it's more a situation where you should indicate if you're interested in this, but it's not something that you need to that you should like allocate a specific number of hours to at this point. The final part of this question was, is there room to propose working with the Google DeepMind researcher to finalize their research contribution after being awarded the grant? Yes, that is something that it's not something that you need to, you will engage in that case with the researcher and with Google DeepMind to work that out. It's not a commitment to do anything in any particular way. It's more just indicating interest in this. The proposal should be about the monetary award, but there's this additional thing that can help you achieve that potentially. So indicate interest if that's something you're looking for in addition. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, next question. Is there an average size for the consortium based on past applications? That's a great question. I don't actually know the average size of the teams for previous grant programs, but I think there's a wide range. And if you go on the website and look at the past grantees, you can see the project team as part of kind of the project summary. So yeah, you can get a sense. David, you might have a better sense for kind of the scale of the project.
Just go and look at the go and look at the go and look at examples.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can research institutions be considered as universities, and can a PI be affiliated with one of these research institutions? So the definition of a university what we consider to be a university is an accredited degree granting nonprofit institution. So unless it is that, then it is not eligible. But you're eligible as a partner institution. Again, this is just a criterion for the PI's institution.
Next question, is Africa eligible, specifically Rwanda? So similar to David's answer to the last question, the PI does need to be based at an accredited institution at an OECD country or in an OECD country, which does not include Rwanda. That being said, we we encourage co-investigators to be from, you know, not just OECD countries and from other types of institutions. And so, yes, eligible as a co-investigator, no, not eligible as a primary investigator if the institutional affiliation is not based in an OECD country.
And we've already granted many grants, which allocate a significant amount of funding to African institutions. I don't think there have been any Rwandan institutions in past grant calls, but we've had Rwandan. We highly encourage teams, including Rwandan researchers and investigators. It's just the criterion is there's a logistical criterion with the OECD member countries. So in some sense, we apologize for that being a restriction, but it is a restriction only on the PI institution. Is the project focused only on climate change itself, or can it include related topics like biodiversity? So biodiversity is often, if not generally, associated related to climate change. So you need to make a case for why your particular project is related to climate change. If you are working on something like biodiversity, there is a large fraction of projects, it is possible for you to make that case, but you would need to make that case. Note that there are some biodiversity projects where that is actually harder. As somebody who works on biodiversity a lot myself, there are many biodiversity projects, and Millie also does this actually. So as two of the program chairs, we definitely understand that biodiversity projects are often related to climate change, but you do need to make that connection. Otherwise, it would not be eligible. Anything you want to add there, Millie? Or?
Yeah, just want to add that there are some example projects from past innovation grants that are kind of biodiversity focused, but obviously have kind of that connection to climate change. And so it might be worth kind of looking at the biodiversity focused projects that have been funded in the past.
Let me also take the next question. The data set, the special track on data set gaps. What kind of support can one get from the Google DeepMind researcher? That is a little bit less clear, unfortunately, at this point. It would be like my sense, and this is not completely clear yet, is that there would be some form of research engineering support, but there could be collaboration with the researcher. So a possibility of either one. The second part of this is, do you expect multidisciplinary, multi-institute collaborations? Look at our past grants. In general, they are, yes. In general, it is multidisciplinary and multi-institute. This is why we keep on stressing that the restrictions are only, the OECD member country and university restrictions are only on the lead institution. It's because most of our past grants have been to multi-institution collaborations.
Great. Next question is about a team comprised of master's and PhD students. Would they still need a faculty member or postdoc researcher to serve as the PI? So the PI does need to be eligible to receive grants at their institution, which in most cases does require that person to be either a faculty member, occasionally a postdoc, though it's worth noting that at some academic institutions, postdocs aren't actually eligible for holding grants. So it's worth checking with your individual institution as to like who is eligible before deciding who the PI on your project is going to be. And I would encourage you to, just chat with your faculty member or whoever you're proposing to kind of have as your lead PI, and they should be able to help you kind of through that process as a student to understand who is and is not eligible for holding grants at your institution.
To what extent do we need to demonstrate preliminary evidence in the proposal? It may be beneficial in making certain cases, but it's not an explicit requirement.
Next question. Data gaps may require the deployment of new stations in remote locations. Does the grant support this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you can
for why that is
yeah.
a really critical gap that's gonna, inform the project and the impact of that project, then yes, it is an eligible expense.
Yeah, I mean, the data gaps track is just about creating data sets that are important for AI and machine learning work and tackling climate change. And if you need a new station for that, then you can make that case. Um, there is, oh, actually, let me take this one. So there's a question about conflicts of interest. You have a conflict of interest if you are a program chair or meta reviewer um, in this grants program. You will know if you are that, and then you also cannot receive funding if you are a member of the Climate Change AI Board of Directors or staff at Climate Change AI. Unless that is the case, you do not have a conflict of interest. Unless you're a member of the board of Climate Change AI, a member of staff at Climate Change AI, one of the program chairs, or one of the meta reviewers. The reviewers actually are eligible to apply. You just will be automatically not assigned your own submission, obviously.
Great. I'll take on the next two questions. So will we get a recording of this presentation? Yes, we will post a recording of this webinar. Will the PowerPoint be available for downloading? I don't
Like
know.
on the recording, you can just look at the
Yeah.
recording.
Okay, yeah. We're gonna post the video, but I don't think we'll have the slides like to download.
Eligibility criteria. No aspect of a project can be double funded by other funding bodies. Can't I apply if I have a funded project and we expanding features and scaling in new directions? But those features were not funded already. Yes, absolutely. It's not that the project itself can't be funded if it received other funding. It's that the particular piece of the project. Suppose that you have, a PhD student who is already funded by something else. You can't then say, I want funding for this PhD student, unless that other funding is being removed or ending. It's just sort of simple. You can't get paid twice for the same thing, but it's the same particular thing. The project can have other sources of funding, and often it will.
Okay, next question is about which specific types of costs of the project are covered by the grant or are eligible to be covered by the grant. David, do you mind taking this since you kind of presented on
Yeah,
that?
sure. Yeah, so again, it's about we had a slide on this, and it is covered again on the website. So it allows for covering of salaries and stipend, and also like tuition expenses for relevant personnel. It would also cover travel expenses for conferences. It could, for example, or field work. It could cover hardware or software costs. It could cover, yeah, those would be some of the main things. It would not cover administrative expenses for a university, or at least that would be considered to be part of the overhead. There is 10% allowed for overhead, and it's not required to describe what that is going into. The 10% is just that would be institutional overhead. You don't have to go into details on it necessarily. But hopefully that answers your question. Feel free to contact us by email if it does not, and the website does not provide additional clarity.
Great. Next question. The PI must be eligible to hold grants under their name at their accredited university. Is this something that the university would be able to confirm, validate? Yes, I'm sure that your university would help you in confirming or validating whether or not you or the person you're proposing to be the PI is eligible to hold grants under their name, given their position at the university. So I'd encourage you to reach out to someone who you know holds grants, and they might be able to either refer you to a person to help confirm or validate, or they might be able to confirm or validate themselves.
So can the funds be used as part of an RCT related to climate change and AI, a randomized controlled trial? Of course, that's a very reasonable way to to conduct work in many fields, you can certainly do that. You'll need to explain how the funds are being used. But there's no ban on RCTs.
Great. The next question is whether or not there's a template for creating your proposal or submission. I don't believe that we have a LaTeX template or any sort of
Yeah,
template. The only thing that we encourage you is to use the headers that are under the application instructions on the website. And so you can find those and kind of a description of what should be under each header. How you actually create that and what the document looks
yeah.
like doesn't matter. So yeah.
There's a budget template, but there isn't a
Okay, yeah,
proposal
that's good.
template. There's a budget template, but not a
Yeah.
proposal. There's no LaTeX template. You're not required to use LaTeX. You can use any program you want to come up with your PDF. It does have to be a PDF. Please don't send us like a PowerPoint file. Can I send my proposal to eligible PIs like professors and ask them to become the supervisor of the project? Sure. You can find a PI however you want. Is there any suggestion for researchers located in countries that are not on the list mentioned here, but are willing to relocate for this research project? Ooh, so it feels it is if you if the institution the grant will be made to a certain institution and people have to be associated with that institution. If there is confirmation that the PI is affiliated with the institution during the relevant period, then we can send the money to that institution as long as the PI is eligible to receive funds at that institution. How you achieve that is completely your business. Any way that is achieved is fine. But there would need to be confirmation that the person is actually going to be at the relevant institution at that point. Though I should note that if you are going to start a position, for example, if you are an incoming professor, you are eligible to apply with the new institution as long as you go through whatever process that new institution requires. For example, you would need to confirm that the new institution signs off on the 10% overhead. But it is fine if you are not yet at that institution, as long as you will be during the relevant dates. And actually, I'll come back to the question about start and I guess end dates of the project. If there is the we would certainly prefer that projects start and end on the posted start and end dates. We understand this may be difficult in circumstances. We're willing to consider adjusted timelines, but you have to justify those. And there may also be, in such circumstances, additional reporting requirements that are associated with the currently posted end dates. For example, you would need to be making a bunch of reporting at the currently posted end date. Again, we're willing to consider other start and end dates, but the default start and end dates will be February of 2025 until February of 2026. Anything else should be justified, and again, reporting requirements may need to be adjusted.
David, can you take on the next question?
There's another question related to the OECD member country reporting requirement. That is a logistical requirement related to the transfer of funds. It is not a commentary about impact regarding projects. Again, we're sorry that there are logistical requirements associated with our being a U.S. nonprofit and being able to make certain grants to certain places.
Okay, next question is about water scarcity is directly linked to drought and climate change, so I assume that it qualifies. Yes, similar to like biodiversity or any kind of related domain or application, as long as you make a good case for why your project or proposal is related to climate change mitigation or adaptation or otherwise, then it is definitely within scope of the grant program.
I'm going to, so there was a, I'm going to pass over this question. Um, ba, ba, ba. Um, um, does the project require deployment capabilities? I'm not quite sure what is meant by that. Um, there should be a pathway to impact. That pathway to impact doesn't have to be, it can be at any stage in the technological readiness level scale. You can take a look at technological readiness levels, if TRLs, if that is helpful. I think that should answer your question. Um, yeah, doesn't require deployment capabilities.
Great. Next question. Are the proposals expected to be 12 pages? Or should it be read as preferably less than 12 pages? 12 pages is the max. We don't care how long your proposal is, assuming that you can get across a compelling case for why it should be funded. Yeah, however many pages that takes, up to 12 pages is
I,
really appropriate.
I will say most funded projects are at or around 12 pages because it just takes a long time to explain the projects. If you submit a proposal that is 2 pages long or 6 pages long, I can say that it is likely that it will probably not have all the content that we need to evaluate the proposal in sufficient depth. Um, so take that how you will. It's not a requirement, but it's certainly not preferably less than 12 pages. Again, you will probably want to use a lot of that space. Do you want to go ahead?
Um, clarifying, oh, a clarifying question on the data set gaps track. Do we need to produce a data set that is crucial for climate adaptation or mitigation research, perhaps by using AI ML techniques, or for climate adaptation mitigation research and AI/ML? That is, does the data set produced need to be AI ML relevant?
Yeah, I guess I should probably take this one. Um, it needs to be AI and ML relevant, but it doesn't have to be created using AI or ML techniques.
Um, can you speak to the reporting requirements for the grant? David, do you mind answering that?
Sure. Um, yeah, so the reporting requirements are typically, um, again, there may be different reporting requirements based upon, for example, if there's a change to start and end dates, but there will typically be a midterm report and a final report. Um, those reports will have various different criteria, which we can talk about, and are part of the contract. They're not designed to be exceedingly onerous.
Great. Next question. Will the geographic scope affect your decision? For example, is there a preference for regional or global scale projects? No, I think is the answer. That isn't like a specific scope of project that has necessarily a larger, pathway or a more compelling pathway to impact. I think that how you explain your pathway to impact is going to be a central part of the evaluation criteria. And if you can do that better at a more localized scale, that is totally fine. And when you look at some of the past projects, you'll see a really wide ranging geographic scope of projects, from like quite localized projects to global scale projects. And so, yeah, there's a range of projects that are eligible and that have been evaluated really positively.
Can the PI be from the private sector? The PI has to accept funds via an affiliation at a university. They can have another affiliation, but the funds have to be transferred to the university with which the PI is affiliated. So if they're solely from the private sector, then no. But a co-PI could be from the private sector. And funds could be granted to that, could be re-granted to that organization by the lead institution.
Okay. I'm going to take on the second to next question just because I have an answer for that. So our website notes that the application needs to be submitted by the 10th of September. But then we presented the 15th of September as a deadline in this presentation. So there is one spot on the website that we will update right after this website or right after this webinar. There's one point in the application instructions where we have an outdated deadline of September 10th.
Oh, whoops. Good
Yeah.
catch. Thank you.
Yes. The timeline like table on the website is correct. The September 10th is not correct. And again, I'll update that like as soon as we get off this webinar.
Yep.
So sorry about that and thanks for your understanding.
Thanks for catching that. And well done. You're the first person to catch that. So if we're unsure that whether our proposal falls under the dataset track or the main track, should we submit to both? Do not submit two separate applications. Do not submit two separate applications. We reserve the right to move something between tracks at the discretion of the process chairs. Make the best guess based upon what you think.
Okay. I think the next question was already addressed for the reporting requirements, so we can pass over that.
Yep.
Is it possible to use the funding for more than 1 year?
In general, no. You can ask for no-cost extensions under certain circumstances. That will be corresponding to changing the end date of the grant. And we can consider that if there is a good reason. There will again be potentially reporting requirements that are, you might need to make an additional interim report in such a case. But that is subject to, discussion with us, basically. So it should not be assumed to use the funding for more than 1 year, but it is something that you can, propose to us.
Great. Next question is about the cap to administrative overhead. As mentioned, there's a 10% cap. And as David pointed out, it's worth kind of discussing that with your institution if it kind of has a standard overhead that is higher than 10%, which it likely does. But they'll often make exceptions for specific grant proposals.
What will happen if during the project, the co-PI changes institution? The PI or co-PI may change institution during the project, and you should interface with us about that. There may be logistics associated with it, but we don't forbid it or anything. That can happen. It may not be possible if the PI changes for the funds to move because the funds will have been transferred to the PI institution, but the PI can then change, or potentially another. We could potentially work different things out. There's no, yeah.
Okay, we're coming up on the hour and we have one question left, which is perfect. Do we encourage Gantt charts or other visual aids to demonstrate timelines? If so, can they be included as separate attachments, which are outside the 12-page length limit? So yeah, I think those can be really helpful visual aids for kind of proposing your project timeline and articulating the feasibility of the project. But they do need to be within the project proposal. And so they will count as part of your 12-page limit.
As a prospective grad student that wants to do research in this area, can you contact a faculty member from a nonprofit university in the US and discuss this grants and research topic? And the advisor will stand in as the PI. You could absolutely do that. You could discuss it with somebody outside the US as well. How you create your team is up to you. We are at time, so we're going to end things here, but we actually did answer all the questions. Please contact us if there's something that you want to discuss that wasn't addressed here for whatever reason. And we can follow up with you by email. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And we look forward to seeing proposals from many of you. Yeah,
Yeah,
have a great
thank you.
rest of your day.